March 17th, 1945. 09:30 hours. Camp Kilmer, New Jersey. A gray morning gone silver where steam rose off the tarmac like low fog. The yard smelled of diesel and wet canvas. Iron gates creaked and clanged as they opened for a returning convoy. A column of olive-drab 212-ton trucks rolled in, their dust streaked with Atlantic salt, from a port unloading. Men in wool greatcoats, MPs with brass lightning bolts on their collars, manned the perimeter while a knot of Red Cross nurses under a blue awning checked manifests. Sergeant James H. Miller, 34, a stocky military police non-commissioned officer with a scar on his left cheek and a regulation M19911 at his hip, watched the trucks shift and breathe, eyes sharp under a tilted cap. You stand at the chain link and try to make sense of the line of faces stepping down from the trucks. They are pale and small against the winter coats and steel helmets of the men who lift their travel packs. But they are not children. They are German, women of varying ages, bundled in mismatched skirts and threadbare overcoats, wrists cuffed with cloth bands, their hair pinned under scarves. One carries a battered suitcase with a polka-dot handkerchief tied to the handle. Another clutches a child's wooden toy, bitten by time. A third walks with a limp, wrapped in a blanket that smells faintly of the sea and old smoke. Their shoes are narrow and worn, their hands tremble. Corporal Ellis, a pale, lanky MP with a clipboard, calls off names in clipped tones. Hannelore Bauer, Anna Weiss, Gertrude Kramer. Names fall into the yard like small stones. A translator, private first class. Robert Klein, a German-American from Cleveland whose father still kept a picture of the old country above the mantel, moves among them, telling them in halting German where to go. He wears a polished steel helmet and a pair of wire-rimmed spectacles that fog in the cold. His voice is calm, professional, but the women's eyes dart to him like birds to a window. They are processed under a canvas awning. Identity checks, photographs, numbers stenciled onto their sleeves with a dip pen and India ink. Ink smells sharp in the winter air. A nurse brushes a thermoscope over foreheads. Someone hands out woolen socks with a practiced efficiency. Sergeant Miller notes the small, almost invisible jewelry, a thin chain, a cameo tucked inside a shirt, relics of lives unaccounted for by war logistics. The women shuffle past the inspection table, their breath clouding, murmuring in German. They whisper to each other in fragments, heißes Wasser? Tücher? Seife? Hot water? Towels? Soap? The questions pass like a current. A lieutenant in a blue officer's coat, Lieutenant Margaret Maggie Carter, waves liaison attached to the camp, her hair pinned in a tight chignon, steps forward with a clipboard that diagnoses comfort like a surgeon's chart. She has wristwatch hands, a precise, practical way of speaking. She tells them in a soft voice that they will be assigned bunks, that baths will be taken in shifts, that the showers are hot. Warm showers, she repeats, as if the words might be talismans. A ripple moves through the group, curiosity braided with apprehension. A woman named Hannelore, 50 if she is a day, steps backward, eyes fixed on a squad of men carrying stacks of brand-new white towels. Her mouth shapes a sound that could be a laugh or a sob. They are led across the yard toward the latrine block, a low wooden building where steam already breathes from vents, a concrete belly humming with boilers and pipes. Inside, the air is thick with the scent of antiseptic and soap, a sharp citrus edge that scrubs at the memory of burned bread and coal smoke. The showers hang like brass trumpets in a row, 8 nozzles soldered to chrome pipes, enamel basins lined in white. Each stall has a curtain, a luxury the women have not seen in months or years. Even the tiled floors look to them like a small white chapel. A Red Cross volunteer, Miss Evelyn Hart, 28, cheeks wind-burned from ration trucks, shows them how to undress, how to fold, how to queue. She moves with an ease born from repetition. A towel here, a bar of soap there, a wrapped comb placed into a waiting hand. The soap is pale and stamped with a familiar American brand name, Small discs that smell of lemon and floating cleanliness. One woman tentatively lifts a bar, fingers grazing the crisp paper, and inhales. The aroma is a shock, immediate and intimate, lemon and lather and something like sunlight. Her eyes widen. The whisper moves like a small flame. "We können Sie das." But zahlen. How can they pay for this? The question is less about money than about wonder. Sergeant Miller stands at the shower door and watches. He has seen men unshave after patrols, soldiers who would sink into a tub like boys finding a pond. He knows the value of hot water to a tired body. He watches Hannelore step behind the curtain, the steam bloom around her like a veil. She closes her eyes, and for a moment the war is a distant drum. The soap slides over her hands and fingers, bubbles rise and pop like tiny white flags. A towel is pressed into her palms, fresh, thick, edges hemmed, and she holds it to her face as if testing a stranger's kindness. Outside, the camp's routine carries on, rifles laid in racks, mess kits clanged in preparation, a radio crackling with a weather report. Inside the washroom, time stretches into a different geometry. Scent becomes memory. Warmth becomes a ledger where old hunger is balanced against new availability. The women move like people discovering an island in a map they thought erased. They exchange looks that contain something like disbelief and arithmetic confusion. In bombing and blockade and hunger, how could this abundance be real? As they step out of the stalls, hair damp and skin pinked by heat, towels tucked like flags around their waists, their whispered question repeats in small, stunned choruses. How can they live like this? Even during war? It hangs in the steam. Outside the latrine, Lieutenant Carter hands them a slip of soap, wrapped in white paper, and a small booklet with camp rules, the paper crinkling like something precious. A young guard, Private First Class Miguel Alvarez, smudged with ash from engine rooms, hands raw from loading crates, offers a smile that is both soldierly and human. He does not have an answer to the arithmetic of comfort. He only knows the work. Boilers stoked, water rationed and monitored, supply lines that hum beneath the surface of this place. And so the first small comforts, heat, hot water, the friction of clean cloth against skin, begin to rearrange the world for these women, one wet towel at a time. They have crossed oceans and a border of language, and here, behind the canvas awning and the barbed wire, something as ordinary as soap becomes a revelation. March 18th, 1945. 6 to 40 hours. The camp woke to the hiss of boilers and the rhythm of boots on gravel. A bell clanged 3 times. Breakfast. From the women's compound, white steam curled from the laundry huts, carrying the faint smell of soap and starch into the morning air. Frost still clung to the fence wires, and beyond them, a row of American flags trembled under a pale sun. Inside Barracks 12B, the women moved quietly. Each bunk was dressed in wool blankets and a single white sheet, folded so precisely it almost looked ceremonial. A potbelly stove stood in the center, its iron ribs glowing red. Someone had pinned a small paper calendar to the wall, March 1945, printed with the face of a smiling nurse. Beneath it, Hannelore sat on the edge of her bunk, combing her hair with the wooden comb she'd been issued the night before. Her reflection wavered faintly in a square of metal that passed for a mirror. The comb dragged through her hair with a soft, rhythmic pull, like the sound of a clock being wound. Around her, the women whispered, about home, about husbands lost, about the soap, always the soap. They give it for free, one murmured. Every day. Another added, it smells of lemon, like summer before the war. They spoke softly, almost as if afraid to break the spell. Outside, Private Alvarez carried a crate of bread and coffee tins to the mess hall. The bread was white, not the dense gray loaves of wartime Germany, but light and soft, baked that morning by an army cook named Charlie Dawson, who used to run a diner in Ohio. He brushed crumbs off his apron as the prisoners filed in, their steps small, uncertain. The scent of coffee hit them first, dark, sweet, heavy with warmth. One woman froze mid-step. "Kaffee," she whispered, incredulous. In Germany, coffee had vanished from shelves years ago. Only substitutes of roasted barley or chicory remained. Here, mugs were filled freely, steaming like invitations. Lieutenant Carter stood by the door, clipboard in hand. She greeted each woman with a polite, "Good morning," and a nod, watching as they hesitated before the trays, eggs, bread, fruit, a dab of butter. One woman crossed herself before eating. Another turned the butter packet over in her hand as though it were jewelry. At the long wooden tables, conversation grew louder. Laughter even slipped between the benches. Strange, fragile laughter, the kind that belongs to people who are remembering what it felt like to be human. Private Klein, the translator, sat nearby, answering questions as best he could. "Yes, you can eat it all," he said with a tired smile. "No, you don't have to pay." The words made a few women stare at him as though he'd spoken magic. After breakfast, a group was taken to the sewing room, a repurposed barrack lined with tables, Singer machines, and rolls of khaki cloth. The air buzzed with the mechanical hum of sewing needles. The women were tasked with mending uniforms and tent fabric, paid in canteen tokens they could exchange for small luxuries, stationery, hairpins, sometimes even chocolate. The work was familiar. Their hands found rhythm in it. One of them, Gertrude, a former tailor from Bremen, smiled faintly as she repaired a torn sleeve. "It feels like a workshop, not a prison," she whispered. Outside, the camp moved with quiet order. Trucks came and went. Letters were sorted. Guards smoked in pairs near the fence. Beyond the wire, farmland stretched toward the horizon, fields just beginning to green with early spring. For many of the women, the openness of the sky itself was disorienting. There were no air raid sirens, no smoke, no rubble. Just clean air and the steady rumble of trains carrying supplies eastward. That night, under a full moon that turned the snow pale blue, the showers hissed again. One by one, the women returned to that room of heat and steam. They spoke little, only the occasional murmur, the splash of water, the clink of metal against tile. Hannelore stood beneath the spray, eyes closed, and thought of Hamburg, the ruins, the dust, the endless cold. Here, in the hum of pipes, she felt her skin again. She pressed the bar of soap to her chest and whispered, almost in prayer, "Wie können Sie das alles haben?" How can they have all this? Outside the building, Sergeant Miller paused to light a cigarette. He exhaled slowly, watching the smoke twist toward the moon. Inside, laughter echoed faintly, soft and uncertain, but laughter all the same. For the first time, he thought, they sounded less like prisoners and more like people reclaiming a piece of themselves. March 22nd, 1945. 14 on 10 hours. The snow had melted into shallow puddles along the gravel paths, and the camp smelled faintly of wet earth and soap. By now, the women had settled into a rhythm, roll call, work detail, showers, mess, lights out. Yet beneath the routine, a question still pulsed through their whispers. Wie können Sie so leben? How can they live like this? From the watchtower, Sergeant Miller looked down at the women's compound. He saw lines of laundry, white sheets flapping clean in the breeze. And for a moment, it didn't look like a prison at all. More like a village, a place rebuilt from the ruins of war's exhaustion. His cigarette burned low between his fingers as he thought of the men he'd guarded in North Africa, hollow-eyed, defiant, ready to spit at anything American. These women were different. They didn't spit. They stared, not with hate, but with disbelief. Inside the barracks, Hannelore sat at a wooden table beside Gertrude and Anna Weiss, mending a torn blanket. Their hands worked in silence until Anna spoke, her voice low. "In Hamburg, we had no soap for months," she said. "We washed with ash." Gertrude nodded. "My mother traded her wedding ring for one bar. It lasted 2 weeks." Hannelore looked down at the neat pile of clean towels beside them. "Here, they give it to us, every morning, as if it grows on trees." She wasn't mocking. There was something almost reverent in her tone. Later that afternoon, Lieutenant Carter visited the barracks for inspection. Her heels clicked against the wood floor as she passed each bunk. "Everything all right, ladies?" she asked. Her voice was calm, but curious. She could feel their eyes on her, studying her polished boots, her pressed uniform, the faint trace of perfume that lingered when she passed. One of the women, a young blonde named Irma Schiller, couldn't help herself. "Fräulein Carter," she said softly, her accent lilting. "How can you live like this, even during war?" The lieutenant paused, startled by the earnestness in the girl's face. She glanced around, at the bunks, the stove, the folded blankets, and realized that to them, even this modest camp seemed like luxury. "Well," she said after a moment, "we plan, we save, we ration, same as everyone. But America has factories that still stand, farms that still grow." Her words hung in the air. The women exchanged glances, not of envy, but of quiet awe. To them, abundance wasn't a matter of wealth. It was peace itself. That evening, Irma wrote in the small notebook she'd been allowed to keep. Her handwriting was tight, careful. "Today, I saw how the guards eat the same food as us. They smile, they share their cigarettes, they have warm water and soap. Even their prisoners are clean. It is a strange country, one that fights a war but still smells of flowers." Outside, the camp lights flickered on, one by one, cutting through the dusk. The faint hum of a generator underscored the quiet, the hum of a nation still running while Europe burned. From the canteen, a phonograph played a scratchy swing tune. A few guards lingered near the fence, humming along, the melody floating over the yard. Inside, the women listened through the open windows. It wasn't German music. It was American, bright and careless, full of saxophone and laughter. For a moment, Hannelor's fingers stopped their mending. "They can afford joy," she whispered. "Even now." Later that night, Private Alvarez made his usual round past the women's quarters. He heard faint singing, soft, hesitant, a German lullaby. The melody was old, but the voices were lighter than before, almost lifted by the echo of that swing tune from the canteen. He didn't understand the words, but he recognized the tone, a quiet rediscovery of normal life. He paused by the fence, looking through the dim lamplight at faces behind glass. Women with clean hair, resting on white sheets. He thought about the question they always asked. "How can we live like this?" He didn't have an answer. But he realized that maybe it wasn't just wonder they were expressing. Maybe it was hope, the first fragile kind. The kind that begins not with speeches or victories, but with hot water, a clean towel, and the impossible scent of lemon soap. March 28th, 1945. 1830 hours. The sun was setting behind the wire, turning the camp roofs gold. The flag drooped in the still air, and from the mess hall came the clatter of trays and the smell of stew. A mail truck rolled up the dirt road, its tires crunching gravel, and stopped beside the administration hut. The sight sent a ripple through the yard. For the German women, letters were the closest thing to a lifeline, proof that somewhere beyond the ocean, their world still existed. Private Klein, the translator, stood at the hut's doorway sorting envelopes into piles. Most bore the thin, fragile paper of European mail, creased and worn from travel. He called out names in careful German. Gertrude Kramer, Hannelore Bauer, Anna Weiss. Each name drew a hush, a pause, as if the moment itself deserved ceremony. The women stepped forward one by one, clutching the envelopes like relics. Some smiled, others cried quietly. That night, under a dim bulb in Barracks 12B, Hannelore opened hers. The paper smelled faintly of smoke. Her sister wrote from Lübeck, "There is no bread, only potatoes. Children line up for soup. They bombed the rail yard again. But they say the Americans are coming soon. Maybe that is good. Maybe they bring food." The words blurred in her eyes. She folded the letter carefully, then took up the pencil the guards had given her. The Americans insisted each prisoner write once a month. Every letter would be censored, but she didn't care. What mattered was the act itself, being allowed to write freely. Her first lines were hesitant. "Dear Liesel, we are in a camp, but it is not what you think. They give us food, clean clothes, and soap every day. We work, we sleep in warm beds. They even let us bathe in hot water. I cannot explain it. It feels like another world." She paused, searching for the right words, then added, "They treat us like people." Across the barracks, other women were doing the same, writing to mothers, brothers, children. The scratch of pencils filled the room like a soft chorus. Some letters spoke of kindness, others of confusion. Irma wrote, "The guards smile at us. I saw one help an old woman carry water. They call us ma'am, not enemy." I think about what they must believe. Do they hate us? I can't tell. In another corner, Gertrude folded a sheet of paper into her notebook, hiding it from view. Her letter was more personal, written not for censors, but for memory. "It is strange to feel safe again. I do not know how to thank a nation that has destroyed my own." Later that evening, Sergeant Miller entered the barracks for the nightly head count. The women stood by their bunks, quiet but unafraid. He nodded as he passed, counting softly. When he reached Hannelore, he noticed her holding an envelope with both hands, as though it might vanish. "You write to your family?" he asked. She nodded. "My sister," she said in halting English. "In Germany." "Good," he replied. "Tell her you're all right." She smiled faintly. "I tell her. More than that." He gave a short nod and moved on, but as he stepped outside into the cool night, he felt the weight of her words. More than that. Beyond the barracks, near the motor pool, Private Alvarez leaned against a truck, cleaning his rifle. "You know what's funny, Sarge?" he said when Miller approached. "They ask me every day if it's real. The food, the soap, even the radio, like they think it's some trick." Miller exhaled smoke. "Wouldn't you? If you came from what they came from?" Alvarez shrugged. "Yeah, guess I would." They stood in silence for a while, listening to the faint hum of the generator, the muffled chatter from the women's quarters. The air smelled of machine oil and pine. Above them, the sky was wide and clear. No bombers, no searchlights, just quiet stars. Inside Barracks 12B, Hannelore sealed her letter and set it by the door for collection. Then she lay down on her bunk, the scent of lemon soap still clinging to her skin. She thought of her sister's words, "Maybe the Americans bring food," and wondered if kindness could travel as easily as war. In the darkness, someone began humming a lullaby again. Others joined in. The melody rose softly, filling the barracks with something fragile but alive. The sound of women remembering warmth, of voices stitched together across enemy lines. The letters would cross the ocean in sacks marked "Prisoner of War Mail," inspected by censors, stamped by clerks, and eventually opened by trembling hands in broken towns. And somewhere, far from Camp Kilmer's barbed wire, German mothers would read their daughters' words and whisper the same astonished phrase, "They treat them like people." April 4th, 1945. 10:15 hours. The spring sun had turned the mud in the camp yard into a soft crust, and the air smelled faintly of pine and detergent. Behind the women's barracks, long lines of white laundry swayed like truce flags in the wind. Fresh sheets, uniforms, towels, all drying under a sky so blue it almost looked staged. Hannelore stood near the line, sleeves rolled to her elbows, scrubbing a tunic in a wooden basin. The water was warm, the soap thick and foamy. She rubbed, rinsed, wrung, then handed the tunic to Irma, who clipped it with wooden pins. They worked in rhythm, the sound of fabric snapping in the wind, keeping time. It was laundry day, a small, uneventful Tuesday by camp standards, yet for the German women it felt like something sacred. Each bar of soap they used still carried the faint scent of citrus. Every clean garment felt like proof that civilization hadn't vanished completely. Nearby, a group of American nurses inspected the drying clothes, laughing lightly as they worked. One of them, Nurse Evelyn Hart, waved toward the women with a friendly smile. "Good job, ladies," she called. "Smells better than my barracks." The comment drew quiet laughter from the women, a few glances traded between them. Even humor, it seemed, had returned to the air. Later that afternoon, while they rested on the steps outside the barracks, Hannelore noticed Private Alvarez approaching with a wooden crate. "Laundry tokens," he said, setting it down. "One for each of you." The tokens were small, stamped with the camp's insignia. They could be exchanged for small comforts, a comb, a bar of chocolate, or a few sheets of paper. When he handed Hannelore hers, she hesitated. "Why?" she asked softly, unsure of his meaning. "For your work," he said. "Everyone gets paid here." She frowned slightly, not in disbelief, but in confusion. "But we are prisoners." Alvarez smiled. "Prisoners still get tired, and clean shirts don't wash themselves." The women exchanged looks, surprise, then quiet amusement. It wasn't the money that mattered, of course. It was what it meant. Acknowledgement, value, a strange kind of dignity, handed out in a wooden token. That evening, the laundry hut filled with the sound of laughter. Irma and Gertrude, emboldened by the warmth of the day, started singing a folk tune from Bremen. Their voices carried through the open window, mingling with the sound of soldiers playing harmonica near the mess hall. For a moment, the music blurred the line between captive and guard. Sergeant Miller, passing by, stopped to listen. He leaned on a post, cigarette forgotten between his fingers. The melody was soft and circular, sung in a language he didn't understand, but he recognized the feeling. Homesickness, hope, humanity. He found himself smiling, almost involuntarily. When the song ended, the silence that followed felt gentle, not awkward. The women went back to folding linens, still humming under their breath. As the sun went down, a Red Cross truck arrived at the main gate. Inside were boxes of medical supplies, and, tucked among them, small parcels marked comfort rations. Inside those parcels were tins of cocoa, soap, toothpaste, and something that made the women gasp when they saw it: tiny glass bottles of perfume. Lieutenant Carter handed them out carefully, one per person. "From the Red Cross," she explained. "Donations." The women unscrewed the caps with trembling fingers. The scent rose, soft, floral, unmistakably feminine. Hannelore inhaled deeply and closed her eyes. "I haven't smelled like this since before the war," she whispered. For a moment, the years of hunger and loss dissolved into the air around her. Irma dabbed a drop behind her ear, then caught sight of her reflection in the window. Clean skin, neat hair, a faint smile she hadn't seen in years. "We almost look normal again," she said softly. Hannelore nodded. "Maybe that's the point." That night, as the camp settled into silence, Miller walked past the drying lines one last time. The moonlight gleamed on the sheets, turning them silver. He reached out and touched one. Warm, clean, still smelling faintly of lemon and lavender. It was a strange thought, but he felt it anyway. That maybe, in a war built on destruction, the quiet work of keeping people clean, of giving them back small mercies, was its own kind of resistance. Behind him, in the barracks, a soft voice murmured in German, half dream, half disbelief. "How can they live like this?" And in the distance, the laundry lines fluttered in the night breeze, white against the dark, like proof that compassion could still survive a world at war. April 9th, 1945. 15 hours. The afternoon light fell soft and warm across Camp Kilmer, the kind that dulled the edges of barbed wire and turned dust into gold. The women were lining up outside the wash house again, towels over their shoulders, laughing quietly as they waited. For the first time, the air didn't feel heavy with suspicion, only the hum of routine. Private Alvarez stood near the gate with a crate balanced on his hip. Inside were neat stacks of soap bars, each wrapped in thin paper, stamped U.S. Army issue. He handed them out one by one, the same way he had done for weeks. But today, he paused when he saw Irma Schiller step forward. She was young, barely 20, with hair that caught the sunlight and eyes still too curious for a prisoner. When he gave her the bar, she held it for a moment without speaking. Then, in careful English, she said, "You give this every day?" Alvarez nodded, smiling. "Every day." She shook her head slowly. "In my town, before the war, one bar like this would last a family a month. And later, we had none. We used cold water if there was any." Her voice trailed off. She looked down at the small white rectangle in her palm as if it were something holy. "You live like kings," she whispered, almost to herself. He didn't know how to answer that. To him, soap was just another ration. Standard, cheap, forgettable. But when he looked at her, he saw what it meant. Not wealth, not luxury, but memory. The scent of a life before fear. Later that day, while the women washed their clothes in steaming basins, Irma lingered by the fence. She saw Alvarez cleaning the same truck that had brought their mail earlier. Impulsively, she reached into her pocket, broke her bar of soap cleanly in two, and held one half through the wire. "For Z," she said. "For you." He hesitated. Guards weren't supposed to accept gifts, but something about her gesture stopped him from refusing. He took the small piece carefully, nodding once. "Danke," he said, his accent clumsy but sincere. She smiled, the first genuine one he'd seen from her. "You speak German?" "Only the good parts," he joked. The exchange was over in seconds, but its weight lingered. On both sides of the fence a small truce had been made, not in treaties or signatures, but in the humble trade of a soap bar split in half. That night, as the women gathered for evening roll call, the sky was streaked with pink and violet. The smell of supper, beans and cornbread, drifted from the mess hall. Irma sat on the barrack steps, watching the guards at their post. She still held the other half of the soap in her hand, its edges soft from the heat. Inside, Hannelore was folding clothes. She noticed the look on Irma's face, quiet, far away, and asked gently, "What are you thinking?" Irma smiled faintly. "That maybe the world is not only enemies and fences," the older woman nodded. "No," she said softly. "Sometimes it's just people and soap." Outside, Sergeant Miller made his evening inspection. He noticed the women talking, laughing even, and thought again about what Alvarez had said days before. They think it's a trick. But tonight it didn't look like doubt. It looked like something else. A cautious trust. He paused by the showers. The air inside was warm and fragrant with the same scent that now seemed to define this strange little corner of the war, lemon, soap, and steam. Through the haze, he heard the sound of water splashing, voices humming an old German tune. As he turned to leave, he saw Irma step out, wrapped in a towel, hair damp, face flushed from heat. She looked freer than she had any right to look behind wire. When she caught his eye, she didn't look away. She nodded politely, not as a captive to a guard, but as one human acknowledging another. And for a heartbeat, Miller thought that perhaps the real victory wasn't in guns or ground won, but in moments like this, where compassion slipped quietly through the cracks of a war that tried to erase it. When the lights went out that night, the camp fell silent except for the wind through the laundry lines, and under that stillness, across the wire, two halves of one bar of soap, one in a soldier's locker, one beneath a prisoner's pillow, stood as a quiet testament to what survival could mean when dignity was shared. April 14th, 1945. 21:10 hours. The camp was bathed in the soft, trembling light of kerosene lamps. The air smelled of spring rain and warm earth, with a faint undercurrent of laundry soap carried on the wind. From the canteen came the muted sound of a radio, the deep, crackling voice of an American announcer speaking of advances toward Berlin. The guards listened half-heartedly, their thoughts already on letters and warm beds. But inside Barracks 12B, something quieter was happening. The women had finished their evening showers and sat together around the potbelly stove, hair still damp, their faces pink from the heat. On the table lay a small parcel that had arrived earlier that afternoon, a Red Cross delivery marked Comfort Rations. Inside were small chocolate bars wrapped in silver foil, the first real chocolate they had seen in years. When Lieutenant Carter had handed them out, the reaction had been stunned silence. Then, one by one, the women began to smile. Irma had whispered, "Chocolate." As if naming something from a dream, Hannelore had turned hers over in her hands, tracing the ridges through the wrapper. Now, hours later, they still hadn't eaten it. Some were afraid to, some wanted to wait until morning, but finally Irma unwrapped hers, the foil crackling softly. She broke off a small piece, placed it on her tongue, and closed her eyes. The sweetness hit her like a memory. Sugar, cream, cocoa, all the things war had stolen. Her breath caught, her lips trembled, and before she could stop herself, tears began to fall. Across the table, Hannelore watched her, then broke her own piece and passed it over. "Eat," she said quietly. "We are alive." Soon the others followed. The sound of foil tearing filled the room like faint thunder. Laughter and sobs mingled as the taste of something once ordinary became overwhelming. They weren't crying for the chocolate itself. They were crying for everything it represented, the years lost, the hunger endured, the small luxuries that had once been life's quiet proof of peace. Irma leaned back, tears streaking her cheeks, and whispered, "In Germany, my mother saved one piece of chocolate for Christmas, for the children. She said, 'If we can taste this, it means the world still has sweetness.'" Silence settled after that, not heavy, but full. A few women stared at their bars as if afraid they might vanish. Outside, rain began to fall in slow, steady drops, tapping on the tin roof like a lullaby. Sergeant Miller, doing his nightly patrol, paused outside their barracks. Through the narrow window, he could see the flicker of lamplight and the women gathered close. As human again. Private Alvarez joined him carrying a clipboard. "Never thought I'd see German prisoners smile at me," he muttered. Miller chuckled. "You give anyone soap and a hot shower after years of dirt and fear, they'll smile at the devil himself." He leaned on the post, his eyes narrowing. "But it's more than that, isn't it? We took away their guns, their power, but maybe this, giving them back a bit of dignity. That's how you win for real." In the mess hall, the women sat at long wooden tables. Breakfast was oatmeal, bread, and black coffee, simple, but warm. Across the room, Hannelore studied the guards, young men, barely older than the women themselves. They laughed, traded jokes, shared cigarettes. She noticed one of them, Alvarez, glance toward their table, then quickly look away, embarrassed to have been caught staring. Irma leaned close and whispered, "He reminds me of my brother, before the war." Hannelore smiled faintly. "Maybe they all do." After breakfast came roll call, then work duty, laundry, kitchen, clerical help. The routine had become familiar, almost peaceful. The camp, surrounded by pine and farmland, no longer felt like a prison so much as a waiting room between worlds. Later that day, Red Cross representatives visited. They spoke with Lieutenant Carter about conditions and praised the cleanliness of the facilities. One of them, a Swiss woman named Anna Weiss, stopped by the laundry shed. She smiled warmly at the prisoners as they scrubbed linens in soapy water. "Your work is excellent," she said in careful German. "Do you have everything you need?" Irma hesitated before answering. "Yes, more than we ever had back home." Weiss tilted her head, surprised. "More?" Irma nodded slowly. "In Germany, by the end, we had no soap, no towels, sometimes not even water. We burned wood in pots just to warm it for washing." Weiss smiled sadly. "War steals everything, except the ability to be kind." When the inspectors left, the women gathered outside for a brief rest. The sun was high now, and they stood in its warmth, faces lifted like flowers. The smell of fresh linen mixed with pine and coffee from the guardhouse. For the first time in years, the world seemed ordinary again. As they returned to their duties, Hannelore whispered to Irma, "Do you think our families will ever believe us? That even as prisoners we lived better here than at home?" Irma shook her head. "No, they won't understand. They'll think we're lying, or mad." Hannelore sighed. "Then maybe they weren't crying for the chocolate itself. They were crying for everything it represented, the years lost, the hunger endured, the small luxuries that had once been life's quiet proof of peace. Irma leaned back, tears streaking her cheeks, and whispered, "In Germany, my mother saved one piece of chocolate for Christmas, for the children. She said, 'If we can taste this, it means the world still has sweetness.'" Silence settled after that, not heavy, but full. A few women stared at their bars as if afraid they might vanish. Outside, rain began to fall in slow, steady drops, tapping on the tin roof like a lullaby. Sergeant Miller, doing his nightly patrol, paused outside their barracks. Through the narrow window, he could see the flicker of lamplight and the women gathered close. He could hear faint laughter, broken now and then by sniffles. He didn't intrude. He just stood there, under the rain, listening. Private Alvarez joined him, his coat soaked. "They got chocolate tonight," he said with a grin. "You'd think we gave 'em gold." Miller nodded slowly. "Maybe we did." Inside, Irma rose and walked to the small window, looking out into the dark. Beyond the fence, the guard towers were just silhouettes, their lamps hazy through the drizzle. She pressed her hand to the cold glass. "Do they know?" she whispered to Hannelore. "The soldiers, do they know what this means to us?" Hannelore followed her gaze. "Maybe not," she said softly, "but that's why it means so much." The rain grew steadier. The sound of the radio drifted from the guardhouse, Benny Goodman, faint and distant, playing through static. The women listened for a moment, recognizing the rhythm, even if not the melody. Irma smiled through her tears. "It sounds happy," she said, "like a world that never had bombs." Before lights out, they wrapped what little chocolate remained in their handkerchiefs and hid it under their pillows. Some saved it for the next day. Others, perhaps, just wanted to keep the proof, the scent, the sweetness, the impossible kindness of it. When the lamps dimmed, the barracks fell quiet except for the rain and the occasional soft breath of someone crying in their sleep. Yet even in those tears, there was something healing, a softness returning to lives that war had turned to stone. And outside, as the night deepened, the American guards stood watch beneath dripping eaves, unaware that on the other side of the fence, their simple acts, a towel, a bar of soap, a square of chocolate, were rebuilding what bombs had tried to erase. The idea that kindness could exist, even here, even now. April 15th, 1945, 06 to 40 hours. The camp woke to birdsong and the thin mist that rose from the damp grass. Dew clung to It's best they never know. That night, the sky over the camp was clear, stars sharp and cold above the dark forest. The women lay in silence, each lost in her thoughts. Across the field, the guards talked quietly by the fence. Miller looked toward the barracks and said, almost to himself, "Someday this war'll end, but I'll remember this part, the showers, the soap, the way they looked at a bar of chocolate like it was salvation." He paused, then added, "Funny thing. I came here thinking they were the enemy. Turns out they're just people trying to stay clean in a dirty world." The wind carried his words across the fence, faint but clear. Inside the barracks, Irma turned in her bunk and smiled in the dark. She didn't know why. Maybe because, for the first time since the war began, she believed him. The next morning the camp would wake again to the sound of pumps, showers, and laughter, the small human sounds of life rebuilding itself from the ruins. For them, the war wasn't over. but for the first time it felt like peace had begun.